This meeting is being recorded. Right. Now let's share. Let's see what we can do. Mm. Okay, so are we good? Can we both see and hear now? I hope so. Okay. So thumbs up on that. Can I get a thumbs up? Excellent. Thank you guys so much for letting me know and for that quick switch. Sometimes we have technical difficulties and we have to navigate real quick. So here we are. Welcome to the Relationship Series, season number 3. I am your gracious host and coach, Genevieve. Um, and we are here. We have transformational conversations here about how to revolutionize our relationship. So I'll go through the intro really, really quickly. We do the work, we heal for real, and we sow what we want to grow. So we sow the seeds that we want to see outcomes in with regards to our relationships in our lives. And today we have a hot topic and one that's not so often discussed as it pertains to relationships, but we'll see as we go through that it's very important. It's a very important topic to talk about in relation to how we build and cultivate healthy relationships amongst ourselves. So I'm Genevieve. I am a speaker. I'm a coach. I'm a therapist and all those things. I'm not an expert in relationships, but I'm certainly passionate about relationships. I love talking about relationships and how we can do better. I discovered my passion when I was a teenager and I sort of looked around and I thought, my goodness, there are a lot of jacked up relationships out here in these streets. And there must be a better way. And so that really started my own curiosity and my desire really to see us evolve in relationships and do well in our relationships. Um, so I've been on that quest ever since, and it's been a wonderful journey. And I've been learning and growing a lot along the way, and a lot of my studies and the things that I do are really revolving around this whole topic of relationships and doing relationships well. So welcome. Thank you guys so much for being here. Again, I welcome you guys to put up your hands, to throw things in the chat, throw your emails in the chat, throw your names in the chat, do all the things that you want to do. Again, it's a transformational conversation. So I want to talk to you. So we'll share one with the other. And so you're welcome to share your experiences and so on, and answer questions and throw questions out there as we go along. Okay. All right. Agenda, very similar to normal. We'll go through some definitions to ground us. We'll have some quotes that we'll talk about that are somewhat stirring. They stir us up in terms of our emotion. We'll look at some statistics that might be intriguing for us. We'll look at a study. We'll look at the benefits of talking about this topic. I'll challenge you because we know that if we don't reflect, we don't evaluate, and we don't apply something to our lives, that nothing changes. And so I will challenge you to apply something that you've heard, that you've learned to your lives for transformational purposes, of course. And these are seeds that we get to plant, right? We're planting seeds. And if we don't water those seeds, they won't grow and produce fruit, right? And so we want to see impact, we want to see effect, we want to see results, we want to see change in our lives. And so that happens when we challenge ourselves to do something different, to make some kind of change and some kind of shift. Okay. I'll also talk to you about what's coming up, some exciting things going on the relationship series and outside of it that I want you guys to know about. And of course, then we get to have some questions answered and asked. And you guys, again, are welcome to throw your questions in the chat as well. Okay. All right. Okay. So this is for you if you want to discuss this important topic and how it impacts you, and how you experience and how you show up in your relationships. This is also for you if you want to develop strategies to deal with how you respond to others when you experience racism. And one of the things that I found, and we'll talk more in depthly about it, was that there is a direct correlation between how we respond to experiences of racism, acts of racism, and then how we respond in our relationships, in our relational contexts, while we build friendships, while we build romantic relationships, while we cultivate familial or kinship ties and bonds. And so it's very interesting to see that our mentalities and our mindsets and how they internalize and then of course translate into expression some of the meanings and messages that we get from racial discrimination and things of the like. This is also for you if you are going to use this opportunity to learn, grow, and share in ways that are helpful, healing, and inspiring. And so I want us to be mindful of these three areas as we have our conversation today. All right, let us talk about definitions. So, racism, what is it? I have three captions here that will ground us, just to give us a sense of what we're talking about. There are a lot of definitions out there, a lot of conversations, and a lot of opinions. This is very basic, but it helps to frame us. Okay, so racism, as we consider it here today for the purpose of this conversation, will be prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism by an individual, community, or institution. Okay, so we're at three levels. Um, Against a person or people on the basis of their membership in a particular racial or ethnic group, typically one that is a minority or marginalized. Okay. And so we're looking at the behavior, prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism. We're looking at three levels. We're looking at macro. Anyway, we're looking at the individual, we're looking at the community, and then we're looking at the institution. And then we're looking against a person or people. So an individual or a people group based on their affinity towards a racial or ethnic group. Okay, so that has to do with our skin color, our features, and our participation in a national context. Okay, there's another caption here: the belief that different races possess distinct characteristics, abilities, or qualities, especially so as to distinguish them as inferior or superior to one another. And so we're looking at what the definition is, or how, sorry, I should say, how we define our characteristics. Okay, so what we're saying here is racism puts our characteristics or our abilities and qualities into categories. Okay, so racism says if you possess these qualities or characteristics, you belong to an inferior or superior group of people. Okay, so there's only two categories here, right? There's dominant and there's minority. That's it. There's superior or there's inferior. Okay, so that's what racism says. And that's what creates the power dynamic. Racism must have a power dynamic. One group must have power, one group must not. One group must have voice, one group does not. One group has privilege, one group does not. And because of the privileges and voice and power of one group, they are able to dominate the other group. Racism requires that dynamic in order for it to be called racism. Okay. And so I've heard, yes, we have reverse racism and all these things. There, guys, let's stick with the basics. Okay. Racism is also a belief that race is a fundamental determinant of human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race. Okay, and so this means that it's fundamental. Fundamental meaning it's unchangeable, right? It's there's no wavering, there's no exiting, there's no growing out of, right? There's hey, you are a part of this race, and therefore you are subject to being who you are and how you are forever and ever. Amen. Okay, so those are the components of racism. They are very fixed, which is why, of course, they are also part of an oppressive system, and therefore, of course, why they are so dangerous and damaging to us, and also very difficult to overcome. So I want us to ground ourselves there. And I might go a little bit quickly through these next few slides just because we lost a little bit of time with regards to the technical issues. But again, I invite you guys to lean in, to hear, to listen, and to allow this to touch your heart in some way. Okay. So racism is a refuge for the ignorant. It seeks to to divide and to destroy. It is the enemy of freedom and deserves to be met head on and stamped out. This is a quote by Pierre Burton. It is a very violent quote. Okay. When I read this, I was like, whoa, yeah, yeah, I felt that. And I felt that from my position as a person who lives in melanated skin. I live and walk and move every day, all day in a racialized body. Okay. And so racism affects me very differently from those who don't walk around in racialized skin. And so this for me, I think it has made sense to talk about racism as a social construct affecting, quality of life, affecting access to resources, affecting, our overall well-being as minority peoples or marginalized groups. Um, but I think we can all agree that and the research probably hasn't examined the association between racial discrimination and sort of couple functioning and kinship ties and so on as much as it could. But I think we can agree that it's worth taking a closer look at why this divisive, destructive thing really um, is dangerous for how we conceptualize ourselves in the context of relationship, right? I think it's important for us to take a closer look at some of the things that we attribute primarily to like individuals, our capacity to empathize and to respond and so on, or our lack of capacity um, to um, you know, I don't know, be direct or express ourselves in relationships or feel safe and trusting, with others. Like I think it's important for us to broaden our perspective when it comes to the things that we have normally attributed to individuals or to individual families, right? Okay, so Black families typically, and we look at the surveys and we look at the census and we look at all the factors within our society that are determinants of health and progress, but they're not so interwoven into um, this sort of system of oppression that then impacts the way we get to do relationship, right? It's almost like it's separate, they're separate entities. And that's why I love this quote, because it says it's the enemy of freedom. There's no freedom in our capacity to be in relationship with others, with ourselves when we are living under or beneath this sort of heavy cloud and this heavy system that is oppressive and that is consistent in the messaging about who we are and how we are to be and what we deserve in the world, right? And I think it's so interwoven into the fabric of our identities, like those of us in melanated bodies, that we don't recognize always how it trickles down and transfers into how we interact on a day-to-day basis with ourselves and with each other. So yeah, you guys can throw maybe your experiences in the chat. I'm sure you guys have um, your own experiences. I remember this was last week actually. I went to a conference and we were sitting at a table. There was probably about six of us at the table. There were two white males and then some dispersed other people, one Black male, myself the only Black female. And we went around talking about our experience and what we wanted to get out of the session or what have you. And I happened to be beside the person who went first, so went around the circle, and then it got back to me, and I was about to start. I was like, I paused, and then I was about to speak, and the only other white male, well, he was a younger white male, he jumps in with like another question because he's like the facilitator, and there's a certain level of privilege in that. Um, you know, your position is to govern conversations and direct things, right? And so he jumps in to ask another question, and everybody at the table sort of pauses and is like, did we not realize that the only Black female at the table hasn't spoken yet? And so, somebody, I didn't say anything, but somebody jumped in really, really quickly and was like, hello, Genevieve hasn't spoken. And it was very much like a jarring moment. He was like, oh, whoa, okay. And I took the moment. It was a little bit facetious, but I took the moment to offer a commentary. I was like, it's okay, I'm invisible. And it was very facetious and it was rude in the moment for sure. But sorry, let me do that. But the thing about that is because I recognize the overall dynamic, which I get to be aware of because I live in my skin, um, I can also offer um, those moments where realization happens, right? And this person, he's a white male. He doesn't have to be aware of the things that I have to be aware of, right? And I think part of taking ownership, and especially when we're talking about dealing with people, right? We're talking about relationships. Part of taking ownership is also being able to call things out. It's also being able to humanize ourselves. Is also being able to put ourselves in the space to call out the overall dynamic, but also to respond and to represent as well, because representation matters. I wasn't going to back out and be like, oh my goodness, it's okay, oh my gosh, I can't say anything. No, I was going to say, hey, this is the thing that usually happens, right? People that live in Black bodies at times are sometimes made to feel and be invisible. I'm not going to do that. Today, I'm going to take my space because here I am sitting at the table, right? And so I think it's important for us to do that in the context of relationships so that we can begin to change how we decide to show up and how people decide to respond to us. Okay, another quote: "Racism is the rejection of our common humanity," and I am in 100% agreement with this quote. Um, this is, oppression and power and privilege personified. Um, we have to dehumanize in order to perpetuate the cycle of oppression. Like, there's no way to have prejudice or injustice if we don't degrade, people. There's no way for us to treat people in certain ways unless we see them in certain ways. We're going to treat people the way we see them, right? So if I put a 10 on your head, and I see you as great and capable and all the things, I'm going to treat you that way. And somehow, some way, that's going to resonate with you, and you're going to begin to behave that way, right? You ever see the person? I mean, there are different contexts where we are re-socialized in society, in prison or in the military, places like that, where there's a particular way in which they treat, say, inhabitants or I don't know, inmates or what have you. But that gets to you at times. It gets to you in your brain, right? Because you see people treating you a certain way, then you start to almost embody that, internalize that, and start treating yourself that way. You start internalizing those messages and beginning to think that's really who you are and how you are and what you deserve, right? And I think this continues to permeate all the spheres of society, whether it's entertainment or healthcare or media, sports, education, business, and of course, relationships, family relationships, and human relationships. So I remember when I taught at Tyndale and Humber College years back, and I used to teach in their sociology department. I used to teach sociology of marriage and the family, and other sort of various sort of marital courses and relational courses. Um, and this is a post-secondary institution, right? But I just thought it was interesting, and we're in the GTA, we're in Toronto, right? This is one of the most diverse cities in the world, and I just found it interesting that the correlation never came up between this social construct and how we do relationships. Like in these Eurocentric textbooks, racism as a social construct was never directly referenced as a sort of a point to look into as it pertains to some of the outcomes that we see within families and marital dyads of marginalized people groups. And I just thought, wow, and even in my research, for our conversation today, I was like, man, this is like an area that's like it's like a secret. It's like a secret area that nobody's really researching, in depthly. And I mean, I had even I was hard pressed to find, a number of a good, chunk, a number of articles um, about it. And so I think there's, yes, certainly an inherent need to preserve, some of the structures that maintain power within our society. But I think it's important for us, especially um, as enlightened, growing Black folks, to really begin to, I want to say, give ourselves a break, give ourselves a break in a sense, but also to recognize how pervasive um, this construct is when it comes to our relationships. And so, because I find a lot of times we're like, oh man, the divorce rate is highest among black on black couples, and oh my goodness, black families are enduring and experiencing this, that, and the other thing, and it's like, oh man, but there's so much that goes into that, and it's not just a matter of personal priority, personal goodwill, personal white knuckling it, like, oh man, right? And there's this sense of like failure, like, oh man, my marriage failed, and oh man, my family this, and oh man, I'm a black man and I couldn't be there for my family and all the things. And it's like, there are so many more factors that are involved. And this is not to give ourselves an out, do whatever you want and never be great, but just to recognize, that there are a lot more pieces at play when it comes to those of us who live in racialized bodies. Um, All right. So I think this is funny. I was listening to what is her name? Cheryl Judas. She's a adjunct professor somewhere in the US. And she has written a book similar to Dr. Banks, which is one of my favorite books. He wrote it in 2012, called Is Marriage for White People? And she's written a book more recently. I think it's called um, Interracial Marriages Between Black Women and White Men. Um, and so she has this really, is it yeah, something like that. Um, she has this really cool approach, right? Because very similar to Dr. Banks, she's like, hey, Black woman, what you need to do, and she's very, very, very adamant about it. She's like, what you need to do is go marry and date and marry some white men, right? And she talks about the particular dynamics that are at play, right? Because of course, slavery wasn't like Asian people and Black people, right? It wasn't Iraqis and Africans, right? It's very specific. It was like, hey, British, Polish, Spanish, white folks, and Black folks, Africa, the continent, right? And so there's a particular history that's involved between Blacks and whites, and it goes back and it's violent and it's savage. Um, and I think one of the things that I've taken for granted over time is some of these messages as it pertains to like marriage and um, like interracial relationships between Black women and white men. And I think and so Dr. Banks has, and the statistic is still relevant today. Black women are the least married population or group of people, I should say, on the planet. Black women, and even though we're educated and you know fierce and out here and independent women and making money and all the things, when it comes to marriage specifically, we are the least married group of people, and not the least desirable or the least attractive or any of those other factors, just the least married, which is fascinating to me. But so much of the narrative is really grounded in like individual choice and deficiency. It's like, well, Black women are really bent on dating and marrying Black men, and the pool of Black men is just not there. It's just not there, for whatever factors, especially in the West. There are a lot of factors and a lot of issues when it comes to, when it comes to that piece. But I think the 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 outcome of that is doing ourselves a disservice as it pertains to our like pool of choice, right? And so a lot of researchers are coming out now and they're saying, hey, um, it would be a good idea for Black. And I don't know how, I don't even know how I might feel about that, and in its like purest form, like, oh, Black women go date white men. But I do believe that perspective is a thing, and broadening perspective is usually highly beneficial for us. So even entertaining the idea, entertaining the thought is fascinating on some level. So anyway, I thought it was interesting that she's talking about relationships between um, Black women and white men, and looking at this dynamic through the lens of this particular social construct. And she's done some good research in this area that is just, it's not really talked about. And what else is fascinating is that the I think I probably have it in the stats. The divorce rate. Amongst Black women and white men is almost flatlined. It's almost like no, it's almost zero. Whereas the divorce rate for Black women and Black men is, I think it's like 44% or 47%. Don't quote me on that. But it's very high. It's very, very high. And I think that speaks to what we're talking about here today, right? So looking at just, various impacts of racism on our relationships and how we show up for one another. And I think yeah, I think it's fascinating, to be honest. Um, how we make sense of these pieces, right? So we'll talk a little bit about how it comes into play after we look at these stats. Um, okay, so Black women and white men marriages are 44% less likely to be divorced. Okay. 46% of Blacks over the age of 15, have experienced acts of racial discrimination at least once in the past 5 years. So this is according to this is the Canadian General Social Survey. So we do like a little census, we poll people and they do a self-report and they submit that to the government. So some of these stats are from there. And then the survey shows a rise in Blacks' experience of racism from 28% in 2014 to 46% in 2019, and it's on the rise. And that's a pretty stark increase. I think that part of what that means is either people are reporting it more, are recognizing it more, um, and of course that it's on the rise in terms of overt racism more, um, and then also the impact of of racial slurs or microaggressions, the awareness of all those. There's been a lot of campaigns, so I think people are more willing now to identify prejudice and discrimination, whether it be in the workplace or elsewhere, um, and then of course to report it. And so I think that accounts for part of the stark increase in numbers. Um, and then also our unwillingness at this point, our levels of tolerance have decreased over time. We're not so keen, to put our heads down and just take it, or just to accept certain comments or certain treatment that I think we have in the past. We're more willing and brave, I guess, courageous to call things out. Um, so yeah, okay. Let me do this. All right, I have a comment in the chat. I believe that people are just more likely to report it now. In some way, people feel free to display how they feel. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There's certainly like a level of freedom. I think, especially within this social media age, people feel entitled and to say whatever they want. Um, but sometimes it's like a surprise when they get pushback, right? It's like, yeah, I can say whatever I want, but then I get mad when people say whatever they want, right? And I think with the especially our social media climate, it makes it easier to not take ownership of what we say. We can just delete comments or say comments, throw it out there, and not be accountable for how our comments impact and affect other people, and in their lives. And I think, yeah, that's a big thing when it comes to experiences of racism over time and their increase for sure. Yeah, thank you for that. All right. So this is from a study, research study done by the Bronfenbrenner Center for Translational Research. So they studied Black couples over time. One study was for 3 weeks, where they studied 98 Black couples. Um, in intimate committed relationships, and they were encouraged to self-report. So they reported their experiences of discrimination, whether it's in the workplace or out in the street or in the grocery store, what have you. And then they had to report how they re-entered or re-engaged with their spouse or with their partner, and what they were feeling, what they said, what their common responses were, and so on. And the second study was actually done by the same group, but it was over a 10-year period by Dr. Anthony Ong. And they focused primarily on Black couples who were married, right? So they were married, and they tracked them over a 10-year period, even up to divorce or separation, things like that, or marital family breakdown, and tracking the very same thing: incidences of discrimination, of racism, of prejudice, of anti-Black racism, all those things, and trauma as it pertains to living in racialized bodies. And so the research clearly established that racism takes a toll on the mental and physical health, but traditionally, that is where the focus has been. And so what these studies did was they pulled some of those outcomes, um, And they looked at how racism leads to the stress response that negatively affects our health, and then how it reduces partners' associations within the context of relationships. So partner satisfaction with their relationships, partner instability or stability, feelings of security over time within their relationships. And then, of course, how they react within the relationships, right? So there's hostility, there's anger, feelings of helplessness, powerlessness, and how that contributes to the capacity for the relationship to stay connected and strong. So for the foundation of the relationship to be healthy, in other words, right? Because if there's constant like defensiveness or anger or hostility or anger or sorry, insecurity, then what we have then is individuals who are seeking to assuage their anxieties in other ways. So we look at substance abuse, we look at affairs, right? We look at whether it's emotional affairs or sexual affairs or what have you. You look at people moving outside of the relationship to get their needs met or to feel better or feel differently rather than leaning into their partner because there's lack of stability and trust. And that's actually from outside factors being internalized into themselves, their own mindset, their own psyche based on discrimination. And so it's very, very fascinating, these studies that they've done, looking at experiences of discrimination and lower levels of relationship satisfaction over time. And so their final conclusion was discrimination erodes relationship outcomes through adverse impacts um, on relationship interactions such as fewer displays of warmth and more displays of hostility. And if you ever done any kind of research on relationships, especially romantic relationship, connection is the fundamental piece, right? A lot of people come and say, "Oh, we can't communicate," but you can't communicate because you don't feel safe, because you don't feel connected, and so that connection is fueled by uh, turning towards one another. And Dr. Gottman has a wonderful institute where he and his researchers can predict divorce at like 94 or 97%, which is crazy. Um, but it's fueled by some of these behaviors that are fostered by feeling safe within relationship, but also feeling okay within the self, right? And we see that, of course, instances of racism or discrimination make us not feel okay within ourselves. And so it's difficult then to be soft and to be warm and to be empathic and to turn towards and to listen and to really be present and mindful in our relationships, right? And so when we display hostility instead of warmth, well, that erodes the security and safety that we can experience within our relationship. And we begin, of course, um, to lose heart and to lose faith and to lose our capacity to be in relationship safely and healthily with one another. So yeah, we look at that racism as a harmful and long-term impact to racism as a long-term negative impact on relationships. All right. Part of what came out in the study as well was the biopsychosocial influencers. So biopsychosocial has to do with biology, has to do with psychology. So biology meaning the body, psychology meaning the mind and the emotions, social meaning relationships or external connections. And so what does racial discrimination do in this case? So racism in the mind, right, or the emotions, it creates feelings of powerlessness, helplessness, fear, anger, right? Senses of injustice. Like, this is just not fair. Like, I'm getting all this flack because of how I am. Like, I can't change how I, right? So there's a lot of that. Um, Racism in the body, when we experience microaggressions or any kinds of injustice or displays of discrimination, bias, or what have you, what happens in our bodies if you pay attention, somatically, it's adrenal, right? It's stressful, right? Our heart rates go up, our palms become sweaty. That has a direct impact over time. When there's a lot of cortisol running through the body over time, like that takes a toll, right? And you'll find that individuals who live in racialized bodies have higher instances of like, high blood pressure or developmental immune system issues, chronic issues, sinus issues, um, bronchial issues, breathing issues, digestive issues, right? There's a lot that goes into that. I'm actually currently reading Gabor Mate's When the Body Says No, the cost of hidden stress, right? And it just talks about all of the implications that take place when it comes to our bodies, and having to deal with adversity on a regular and day-to-day basis. And so taking care of ourselves is really, really important, in this case. Racism and others, when we look at the social context, what happens? Some of our common responses include withdrawing, lashing out, of course, being hostile. And sometimes we're hostile in uh, unrelated areas, right? So displaced anger is a really big thing. We feel powerless at work, and so we try to, exercise extra power at home or at church or wherever else we feel as though we can, um, do that. Hostility, instability, low levels of emotional intelligence, so not necessarily recognizing how our behaviors and our reactions impact and affect other people. Um, Sometimes we're dysregulated, we feel out of control. And then, of course, roles that we play. Sometimes we adopt, the role of the victim, like, oh my God, like the world is against me and so on, and I can't do anything. I'm never going to amount to anything. And sometimes we adopt the role of the hero. I'm gonna make it. I'm gonna do all the things, and and we're sort of extra vigilant. Um, but yeah, maybe you guys can think about um, what has happened to you, what has taken place, with you in terms of racism and how it's really trickled into your relationships, how you see your spouse, how you see yourself within the context of your family, right? And how you're doing. Like, oh my goodness, I'm doing the best I can. I'm the best father. I'm the best mother, and so on. But yeah, maybe just taking a moment to think about that. Um, Yeah, maybe we'll go through this. This is part of the study as well. So men reported higher levels of psychological aggression versus women who reported higher levels of physical aggression, if they experienced racial discrimination. And so for men, it's sort of, caught up here in the mind. So a lot of like internal stress, internal questioning, internal um, struggle and wrestle, while women, it's in our bodies. It's in our bodies. And so, ulcers and breast cancer and all these other things that sometimes we don't have reference for, can be attributed to some of this ongoing management of living in melanated skin, right? And findings do suggest that racial discrimination may be negatively associated with relationship functioning among African Americans. So that was an American study that came from. Okay, so these are all the pointers and all the pieces. So now, what do we do? Right? And y'all know I always have practicals for us, right? What happens now? What happens? What do we do? What's our role? What's our part? Um, Last week we got a chance to talk about Black mental health. And so sometimes we keep that in a box, like Black mental health, right? But here it is that we have autonomy, we have capacity, right? So some of the practicals for us as we recognize that this is actually a thing, some of the practicals for us include taking responsibility. So, responsibility means that we lean into awareness, right? So, we become more aware of what is going on, right? Some of the factors that are contributing to the ways in which we show up in our relationships and how they might be negatively or unsatisfyingly affecting us. And so, if we see things that we are doing that are happening that we don't like, um, not only being aware, but guarding and fortifying against it. And so, not guarding ourselves from our loved ones, but guarding our hearts, right? So, guarding against the impact or the transference of the impact of dealing with racial discrimination and how that then transfers to how we show up in the context of relationship with other people, right? And so when we guard ourselves and we fortify ourselves, then we can mitigate against the transference, right? Um, Last week we talked about radical Black care, which I'll throw out again here, because it's necessary. It is necessary to take better care of ourselves. And I know radical self care and all the things and all the things. And yes, everybody should do self care, but people that live in Black skin have to take it up a notch. We do. We do. We have to take it up a notch. And I call it radical Black care, because we have so much more to deal with. And that's the truth. And I know sometimes we like to, explain it away and all the things, but it's the truth, right? And so we have to be mindful of the level at which we experience adversity, oppression, all the things, and then of course match that level with our diligence and determination and discipline in caring for ourselves, and for our marriages and for our friendships and for our families, and for our relationships, right? Another practical, expand our perspectives. And this is what we're here doing today, right? Recognizing that there's other factors at play. There are other pieces, to the puzzle that we may not have looked at as closely, um, before now. And so it's important for us to expand our perspectives, to have these kinds of conversations, to talk with one another, to share with one another, and then, of course, to lean into the work that's required as a response. And of course, the bottom line and the benefit always is the same for us in our conversations in the relationship series. Revolutionary relationships, are our outcomes, right? So when we have revolutionary relationships, we have revolutionary lives, because that's what we're created to do, to be in relationship with one another. And we get to live at a standard of fulfillment and purpose that most people don't. Most people who don't do this kind of work, who don't have these kinds of conversations, don't get the results. Um, and hey, healthy people do what other people won't, right? We all can't be Venus Williams and LeBron Jameses out here in these streets, right? They do extra, they get extra. So we do extra in the context of a relationship, so we get extra. So I'll encourage you guys to lean in, to building your awareness, to guarding and fortifying yourselves, to radical Black care, and to expanding perspectives, um, as we go along. This is your personal challenge. It's the same every single week. Apply something that you've heard here today, change something about your life, teach something to someone else, and that's your act, right? Take action, take action, take action. So throw it out in the chat. You guys normally do this really cool. Just, hey, what are you going to act on this week? Are you going to reflect on something? Are you going to evaluate something? Are you going to journal on something? Are you going to, implement something within your family? Are you going to even have a conversation with your white boss? Or are you going to take the recording and, I don't know, share it with somebody? What are you going to do this week to act on what you have heard here today? Okay, throw it in the chat. Let me know how you're going to act this week. And how much time do I have left? Okay, we got 6 minutes. Mentaverse app, MENTA verse, VERSE, Mentaverse, like mental universe type of thing. It is an app you can download from the Google Store or the Google Play Store or the App Store on Apple. It will have all the recordings by the end of this month for season 3 of the relationship series. Season 1 and 2 are already up there. So you can go back and listen to all of our conversations, which were a lot of fun. And then, of course, delve into these ones and get a little bit more meat. And then what is coming up next Thursday? Next Thursday is March the 21st. My apologies, guys. So next Thursday, March the 21st, not the 14th at 1 p.m., we are going to be talking about money matters. And this is another area that highly impacts our relationships. In fact, it's stated as one of the one of the highest reasons, that people get divorced, when it comes to, money things. But money itself, when we talk about our relationship with money and sort of how it creeps into how we communicate, creeps into how we engage and establish meaningful connection, we look at it, oh, high value men make 100 or 6 figures, or high value women this and that. We hear a lot about, how we value ourselves based on the money that we make, right? Our monetary value, or what's in our bank account, or how much we, own in assets and things like that, right? And so money is a really big thing, whether we have enough or more than enough, or whether we're content with what we have or we're not content with what we have, or, whether we have lots of assets or no assets. There's always something sort of running in the undercurrent there when it comes to money matters. And so we want to talk about, how it impacts our relationships, right? We want to really get down to sort of the nitty gritty of our philosophy when it comes to money, and even how it might get in the way, How it might get in the way of our capacity to do relationships well, to see people as valuable, do we see them as dollar signs or what have you? Do we judge other people because they're not like us, right? I had a friend who's very, very, very well off. Um, in fact, but she rents, a small house with her kids, and she prefers to travel and have experiences. And she gets a lot of pushback, like, why don't you, you know, buy houses for your kids, or invest in real estate, or do this, that, and the next thing. And she's just like, well, that's not me, and she gets a lot of criticism for that. And so there's this sort of mindset that says, well, you have to do things in a certain way with money in order for you to be accepted, or what have you. And so it's very interesting, the thoughts and ideas that we have surrounding money, how it should be used. um, and yes, money does offer us a certain amount of freedom and capacity in the world, and so on. But yeah, it's really important to talk about how it plays into this sort of higher calling and this sort of higher purpose to be in healthy, meaningful connection and relationship with our fellow human beings, and how sometimes we allow this concrete um, thing to get in the way of that, right? To hinder our ability to do that, and even to break that up at times. So we're going to be talking about that next week. Money matters, and then of course, Belize Wellness Days. We're doing a 2-day wellness well, we're doing a retreat, but the retreat part is closed. Registration is closed. So anybody that does want to come, because a lot of people have asked, hey, can I just come and get my own Airbnb and come to the wellness days and so on and get all the things? Yes, you can. We're going to do 2 days. It's going to be the same amount of time. So the 16th and the 17th will be the 2 full wellness days in Belize. Come on out, invite somebody out. If you guys want tips and tricks on flights and Airbnbs and all that stuff, you can for sure message me at Corner Counselor on IG, cornercounselor@gmail.com. If you have my number, message me on WhatsApp, all the things. And I'll let you know how you guys can join in and participate. It's going to be a time. Belize is awesome, as you know. So I want you guys to participate in that. And we are done. Any questions? Any questions, thoughts, feedback? We got it in today. We got like 1 minute left. Um, along with all these technical difficulties, we managed to make it. But yeah, thank you guys so much for being here. Ema, might have missed it because I joined late, but do you mind reviewing the benefits of interracial relationships for the unhappily single Black man? Ema, I'm gonna message you. I'm gonna message you later. We're gonna stop the recording. Um, you're very welcome, Chadwick. Thank you so much for being here. Ema, we're going to, I don't even know how to click out of this because I'm on this other device here. Stop share. Can I do that? Can I do that? Can you guys see me? I hope so. Let's stop sharing. Okay, yes. Yes, Ima, we'll definitely talk about that if that's okay with you. Is that good? Uh, awesome, awesome, awesome. I'm glad you guys took something away. And I hope that you guys will apply something. What are we applying? You guys didn't put what you guys are applying. What's happening? What's happening? Let's talk about this application, guys. What are we applying today? What are we applying this week? Uh-oh. What am I doing? Okay, so we're not applying anything this week. Is that what's happening? Is that what's happening? We're not going to apply anything. Okay. Well, I hope you guys will apply something, and that as much as you've taken away from this conversation today, that it will be impactful, that some kind of seed was planted, and that, of course, it will germinate and produce good fruit in your lives. Thank you so much again for being a part of the relationship series where we talk about how to revolutionize our relationships so that we can revolutionize our lives. Thank you so much for being here. You guys are free to go. Thank you again for spending your time and your lunch hour with me. And we'll see you next week, Thursday at 1 o'clock. And we will be talking about money matters. Bless you guys. Have a great rest of the day.